Hey, what's up, Truth Seekers? Welcome back. So jacked to be with you. It's a brand new year, and this next guest I have coming on today has actually been awarded the Story of the Year by Tucker Carlson, who runs the Daily Caller, the Bulldog Award by Michelle Malkin. He is a former investigator for the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, and I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for this. When Matt Drudge became a big deal, it's because Bill Clinton's story with Monica Lewinsky got buried by Newsweek and nobody wanted to touch it. And I started thinking to myself, if Watergate had not been reported, would you know about it? Like, what else goes on in Washington that you'll never know about because they don't want you to? And this is one of those stories, when I got the book, it reads like a political thriller. I could not put it down. I read it over the weekend, and I'm really, really excited to have the writer who's still doing true journalism. His name's Luke Rosiak, and the book you can see here is called Obstruction of Justice: How the Deep State Risks National Security to Protect Democrats. But what's surprising about this is he says the book is just as damning for both sides of the table. It just so happened it happened on the Democrat side of the fence. So, Luke, really excited to have you on. How are you?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So when I finished reading the book, my wife's like, "What are you doing in there? Come out. We have kids. We have a family. We got to run our household." I said, "Look, think about how much you hated Making a Murderer 2, like how ticked off that made you, and then combine that with Narcos. Like, put the government state in charge of protecting someone and keeping you out of jail. That's what I'm reading about." She goes, "Oh, let me see it." And now she's reading it too. So give everyone the 30-second hook of what is going on here.
Well, this is a story for people that saw during the 2016 election how the FBI rigs political investigations. And it turns out that at the same time that the DNC was hacked, Congress was hacked by this Pakistani guy named Imran Awan. And so they decided to cover it up until after the election. And in the meantime, evidence started disappearing. Witnesses were threatened. And basically, the FBI worked with the Democrats, and the media was happy to go along, and they rigged this case. So this is sort of a lens into how the deep state works through this really remarkable story that most people have never heard about. But when you read it, you're like, my God, this is insane. This is a movie. How did this happen? And we were never told about it. And as you said, what else is going on that people just that they just decided not to tell us about?
So I'm sure when people hear you say, "Oh, he's a Pakistani," they're thinking automatically, "You know what? Luke must be a xenophobic racist, and he just hates people that are Muslim." And that's probably the first time you've been accused of that. They probably wouldn't believe that these people were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from government offices, that they worked for over 40 Democrat Congress people, and that this guy had his whole family on the payroll, including one person whose IT experience can be summed up with former McDonald's employee. Do I have that right?
Yep.
What are the other particulars that will shock people as they read? Like, when I'm turning the pages, I'm like, this can't be true. No, this somebody in Washington, someone that made it to the level of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would know better than to allow this to happen in their office. What else can you tell us?
Yeah, well, no, you're right. I mean, it's funny because when you read the book, you see that for years, Democrats on Capitol Hill were very, very concerned about this guy Imran Awan, and that his whole family eventually was getting paid as IT guys. And bad things started happening. Computers started disappearing, huge amounts of them. And eventually they realized that they were logging into servers that they shouldn't have been and taking data off the House network as well. And so it was Democrats, of course, who were working with these guys and who saw it first and were raising the alarm. And at the same time, this guy's family members all started becoming really concerned and noticing that he was taking, he took money from a foreign government official. He was traveling in Pakistan, escorted as a political VIP with he had basically an entourage of Pakistani agents protecting him. He had money flying around every which way. And basically, this is a guy who started threatening to kill people in Pakistan if they didn't keep quiet. And so it was Pakistani Americans who wanted to do the right thing and who love America and who were concerned about their own relative. They had the courage to step up and to tell the FBI what they were seeing, and eventually they came to me. And then you've got Democrats who were also trying to blow the whistle and go through the formal channels inside the House. And what all these people found is a cover-up. They were threatened, they were abused, they were fired in some cases by, the leadership of the House, like Nancy Pelosi. The FBI eventually, evidence disappeared under the FBI. The FBI was like basically preventing witnesses, basically kind of intimidating the witnesses instead of helping them. And as you said, so the Democrats publicly They never were going to tell us about any of this, despite it being kind of like the real foreign. Oh, it's all the stuff that the Robert Mueller and Russia thing was supposed to be, with this crazy foreign meddling and hacking and, cloak and dagger stuff. All of this was documented in the House of Representatives. And so, for example, during the 2016 election, they write a report that says the House Democratic Caucus server is key evidence in a felony hacking probe in the House of Representatives. So it's kind of like the DNC's sister group. This one's called the House Democratic Caucus. And so they say, oh, well, yeah, all right, we caught a hack, but let's just wait for a few months and then we'll investigate it. So they wait and wait and wait. And then they go to seize the server and they write this report, the Capitol Police do. They say, my God, the server has disappeared while it's evidence in a hacking probe. And so these are the kind of things that are like, obviously, more crazy than the DNC hack, anything like that. The idea that they would have just shrugged and this is no big deal is completely inconsistent with the idea that Democrats actually care about cybersecurity and foreign meddling. And so they kind of gaslight everyone and they hide it and they make sure there's no arrests because that means no media. And then they basically say eventually when this kind of comes out, oh, I bet Donald Trump picked on this guy because he's Muslim. And when you read the book, you see how completely cynical and really sick that is, because the Muslim members of his own family were saying this guy admits to being a mole in Congress. He threatened to have me killed if I came forward, but I need to do the right thing and I need to speak up. And then the same thing for the Democrats. Whistleblowers retaliated against. And so it was so absurd. But that kind of highlights one of the many angles going on here, which is kind of like Donald Trump derangement syndrome has kind of served as a convenient foil for a lot of bad people who are doing bad things. And so if you want to deflect from something these days, you just kind of say the name of Trump and then people go into their camps. And so like you said about Watergate, I mean, I really wonder what would happen if a big scandal like that happened now. Could you just say fake news? Could you just say, could you count on that kind of Twitter length attention span where people don't want to go into the details? And so this is this enormous case that's really documented thoroughly in detail in my book. And it's wild. It's like out of a movie. No one was going to tell us about any of this. So he actually was caught in the same week that the DNC was hacked, which was the summer of 2016. But I didn't know about it until the week that Donald Trump was inaugurated. And that's because they sat on it and they did what they call a news dump, which is you release it at the same time that everyone else is distracted by a bigger story. And so I saw a little press release and a little story in Buzzfeed that said some IT guys on Capitol Hill had been caught doing something wrong, but no one really knows what it is. And they didn't name them. And so what I did is put in the reporting to find out their names. And once I found out their names, I was like, my God, there's some bad stuff going on here. Well, so these guys had like a ton of shell companies that were taking money, and the FBI produces suspicious activity reports on people, they call them. Hundreds of suspicious activity reports on these guys, all the cash they had flying every which way. And so while they're working full time as the IT guy for members of the Intelligence Committee, access to all their data, they set up this company called CIA LLC. And it's supposed to be a car dealership, but they've got like a website with fake employees. It's basically a front company. And they use this company to take $100,000 from the guy you mentioned, who is an Iranian. He's actually an Iranian-born guy who went on to become a government minister in Iraq, and he's been tied to Hezbollah. And so they hid this money. You're supposed to disclose any kind of companies you have an interest in for the FBI, of course. I mean, to the House. Of course, they lied. That's a felony. They hid this company. So the company was a way to take money from this foreign government official while they're working for members of the Intelligence Committee. And that kind of thing is documented. It's proven. It's not like some out on a limb thing. I mean, the documents are down in the Fairfax County Courthouse in Virginia that prove all that. And so it's one of many examples where the FBI, they basically said, oh, even though the House Inspector General found that this guy hacked Congress, and even though we know that hundreds of thousands of dollars of, equipment went missing in the House, we're not going to seek any charges. There were numerous examples where this guy had relationships with foreign government officials, and this is one of them.
All right, so another question. There's a gentleman named Dre Carson. No, I'm thinking, is it Dre Taggart or Carson? I might get these mixed up. Dre Carson attacked you and called you a sixer. That's what Prager calls a sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, racist. What's B for? Bastard? No, bigot. And there was another guy named Taggart who was accused of being all those things. He was accused of being a racist, xenophobic, right-wing nut job. Why is that critical in the story?
Well, so Andre Carson is a member of the Intelligence Committee that these guys were working for. He also happens to be one of the couple of Muslim members of Congress.
That's right.
And so when this guy was banned, Imran Awan, they wait months and months and months, and they finally ban him from Congress, but they don't arrest him. And so it turns out that after he's banned from Congress, he still has a back door into the computer system through an account called 123@mail.house.gov.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about
which
that.
is pretty completely insane because everyone else is just like first name dot last name dot at mail.house.gov. And so they have this. So I find out about this address, and I have like obtained emails from him where he's like typing from 123@mail.house.gov. He says, this is Imran. It's his address. And so the cops don't shut it down, even when he's been kicked off the network. And it turns out that the reason is because he's stolen the identity of Andre Carson's lead intelligence staffer and put the account in his name. And so he's still got an active account. He's stealing the identity of an intelligence specialist on Capitol Hill. That's not a coincidence. I mean, there's 10,000 people on Capitol Hill. Most of them don't do intelligence committee stuff. And this guy creates an account in this guy's name. And so before I reported that story, I felt as an American, I got to warn Andre Carson and shut down that account because it's connected to a current hacking suspect. And so Carson refused to shut down the account. He accused me of somehow falsifying evidence to make all this up, even though the evidence was, in court documents that predated, that had nothing to do with me. It was provable. And so instead of doing the right thing, I mean, Carson lashed out at me, accused me of being Islamophobic or whatever, provided no evidence and never disputed the fact that basically they didn't shut down the account and they didn't show how the hell this happened. And so there was overall this mentality where the Democrats kind of put up this blue wall, they banded together and tried to basically they didn't cooperate with investigators. They didn't discuss this in the media. And by all intents and purposes, they were kind of protecting these hacking suspects. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the other big employing congresswoman here. They worked for her for a long time. And again, they got caught hacking the House of Representatives right after the DNC was hacked. Well, then they come into the House, again, after he's banned, he takes Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop and he leaves it in a phone booth at midnight, which seemed to me kind of like a warning shot. Like, you think, like, basically blackmail, you think I won't release your data? Remember, I have access to all this stuff, so you better protect me. And sure enough, that's what Wasserman Schultz does. She threatens the police. She spends like $200,000 on lawyers trying to protect this guy, her own money. Absolutely. It was extraordinary. And, there's video out there of her threatening the police chief of the Capitol Police, give me back that laptop. And he's like, it's evidence. Don't you want me to pursue a hacking investigation? And she just basically tries to block the hacking investigation. And so, you know, it's really hard to see why she would do that, having just lost her job as the head of the DNC after a hack like a couple weeks before. Um, there is a lot of, at a minimum, extreme negligence and incompetence about the way that Democrats ran their IT, and in general, the way that the House of Representatives operates. I think a lot of people don't really have a great opinion about Congress as it is, but you read this book and it's shocking how it really is amateur hour over there.
Yeah, I think I found it in here. You said you were concerned as an American citizen that there could be a security breach. You'd heard this before, and that then he went after you and said, I think they've proven themselves to be bigoted, Islamophobic, and anti-black. It goes along with their narrative of anybody who is foreign, who happens to be a Muslim, who happens to be black, happens to be Latino, who conducts unethical acts, they want to condemn the entire Congress. This is Carson. And then you said they went on to do what government does when they get pinched. They passed a bill called the Cybersecurity Assistance. What is that?
Well, so Congress actually made a law to block the FBI from investigating this case because they didn't want you to find out about it. They wanted to talk about Russia and all that. And they didn't want it to be known that they had been hacked by these Pakistani guys that the Democrats hired and failed to vet. And so they pass a bill that says, if we're ever hacked, the FBI can't come in and investigate without the Democrats, without the minority party being in agreement. And so they passed this bill.
Smart.
And, Republicans were in charge of the House. They went along with it. And, presumably they were told, hey, it's about independence of our institution against the executive branch. And remember, the parties are going to be reversed soon. And sure enough, they are. So we want to protect the minority party's rights and blah, blah, blah. But publicly, they wanted to act like, hey, what are you talking about? This Pakistani guy, that's like a weird peripheral story. It's no way. It's a sideshow. That's not. It just goes to show that we are being manipulated because inside the House of Representatives, this was an extraordinary deal that people were absolutely frightened about. They thought it had the capacity to basically change a lot. And they went to that extent to make a law to block the FBI from coming in. So you've got Wasserman Schultz threatening the Capitol Police. You got a law keeping the FBI out. And eventually, the FBI is allowed to come in on a limited capacity, basically kind of controlled by the House of Representatives. And sure enough, the FBI basically does the bidding of the leadership and rigs this case. They don't do any search warrants of these guys, even though they know that servers are disappearing and much, much more. Never seen so much probable cause in my life on any case, but they didn't even do their search. Meanwhile, of course, they're like busting down the door of like Roger Stone and everything.
Right. I wanted to finish with that because you talk about how many interviews they said they did, and they started targeting people they could pin this on that you'd been talking to for years. I think Teresa is the one I want to discuss later and what happened to her. But I'm curious about, you start and end the book with, I'm going to say her name wrong, Samina Ashraf Gilani. Is that who it is that you sit with at the beginning in the National Mall and at the end?
Well, so there's multiple Muslim women who are in his immediate family who came to me and came to the FBI. They came to the FBI first, and they were not helped. So then they came to me reluctantly. The first one is his wife. Now, this guy has actually two wives at the same time. He's
Awesome.
a polygamist. And he's living in Virginia, and he's been in this country since he's 17 years old. But he basically has two Sharia law wives that he keeps in apartments in Virginia. And so one of them, actually both of them, say in government records that this guy's controlling them with death threats. And so one of them says, look, he told me he's a mole in Congress, and I tried to call the cops, and I have the police record showing she did. After that, she goes back to Pakistan, and someone tries to kill her. And so she takes that as retaliation, keep your mouth closed. So she comes back here, and it gets worse and worse, and he's like trying to make her buy like gold bars to like hide money from prosecutors, just completely insane stuff. She just is like eventually sickened by what he's doing, and she thinks it's wrong, and she wants to speak up. So she says she's going to go to the FBI, and he says, well, guess what? I've used my IT skills I've been bugging you. I've been monitoring you this whole time with like hidden cameras and stuff. I got this sex tape.
They're
so
filming them. Yeah, they made a tape too, right?
Yeah, so he starts
Kardashian
blackmailing his own wife with a sex tape, and so this to keep quiet. And this woman is so brave that she goes to the FBI anyway. Well, the FBI, basically bullies her and actually stands out front of her house to prevent her from going to court. to one of these court dates, so she couldn't stand up and tell the judge what he had done. And in court, they say, "Oh, this is a great guy. He never did anything wrong in his life." So he's got this wife who's saying he admitted to being a mole in Congress, begging for help. She's shot at, just completely abused. And so that's how I opened the book, is kind of this woman just being like, I came to this country from Pakistan and it's pretty corrupt over there. And I thought in America things would be different. But when it comes to the Department of Justice, it's really not that different, right? You have two classes of people. You have the everyday people like us who have to follow the laws. And then you have these connected people who are powerful, working on, Capitol Hill, being protected by these congressmen, the elites, they have a completely different system that they play by. And I just thought that was just such a striking observation from someone who had, lived in both places.
Yeah, the picture of him being in court and her being locked in a room, like the mountain standing in front of her door, not letting her go down to the Judiciary Building, is fascinating. And then there's some other stuff that came up in terms of this guy. It was Imran Awan. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but just the things that you write about him, starting with the fact that he's got all these shell corporations, he's got multiple properties, he's got family members all over the place getting paid. It is like the mafia. And you said the FBI actually referred to them as the family, right? His corporation that either owned his property he was working under was called, what was it called? New Dawn 2001. Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
What a stick in the eye. So nothing significant about 2001.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the fact that the Pakistani news media was reporting that this guy was a total crook. He was going around Pakistan with either FBI or government agents protecting him. And his dad, who was on the payroll, was also a big winner. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so, when the FBI says, "Oh, we did a thorough investigation, trust us, we didn't do anything." If you Google this dude's name, a Pakistani newspaper article in the English language comes up from 2009 that talks about how he was basically doing massive fraud over in Pakistan, and a lot of people tried to have him thrown in jail, and he summoned this tremendous political influence that he has over there by telling people how influential he was because of his job in America, where he's an IT guy. And so the government in Pakistan starts giving him protection, and they actually round up all of his victims, and throw them in jail. And so they have basically these 70-year-old men where he stole all their land. He basically stole this entire town of land, tons of acres. And the 70-year-old men who were the farmers tried to have him thrown in jail. Well, they're thrown in jail instead, and they're framed. And so this is an example from 10 years ago where he frames his victims and, bullies people and makes evidence disappear and uses his political influence to silence people. And so the idea that this guy his job should just be like plugging in your mouse in America, he's like, it should be a nobody, when he's got this clearly just tremendous. I mean, you almost have to read the article. This is, again, contemporaneous from 2009 in Pakistan. This is a massively powerful person in that country, and it all stems from his influence. And so he actually tells people in Pakistan, "I have the power to change the president." And, I mean, I assume that's just like a crazy bluff, but he's telling people all of this. He's basically telling people about this extraordinary influence that he supposedly has, and then you see that it's kind of true.
Yeah, he's able to back it up, right?
What's that?
He said he's able to back it up. He's able to threaten people into submission.
Totally.
There was the issue where then they resold the property out from underneath them, and then there's a point later in the book where Muhammad's wife here in the States dies. She passes away. And tell us about what Abid and Awan do at that point. Kind of give us a glimpse into their character.
Well, so they make $7 million in congressional pay alone over the years because they get congressmen to pay them for no-show work. So you've got the one guy, Imran Awan, who's actually doing work for a bunch of members on a part-time basis. But they inexplicably caused members of Congress to start paying his entire family chief of staff level salaries each. So $165,000 a year to his 20-year-old brother and so on. No one else on Capitol Hill makes that kind of money. And so through that, they make $7 million over the last decade. And this money is stored in Pakistan, and it's hidden in the name of the guy's dad so that the FBI can't seize it. The problem is the FBI, the dad dies. And so they say, oh crap, what's going to happen to this money? Because his wife could inherit it.
Right.
So they take his wife, who's not their mom, it's their stepmom, and they hold her in captivity. So she calls the cops and says, she files a lawsuit and says, I was held in captivity by these guys. They used their IT skills to monitor me. They wiretapped my phone, and they said, we know, don't leave the house. We're watching you every second. And so this woman is extorted into signing over her interest in the money that's stored over in Pakistan. And this is basically the FBI won't do anything to help this woman. And I say, she just tells me, like, in writing, like, they are threatening to kill me if I come to the FBI. And so eventually, through this lawsuit, they steal a bunch more money from her and stuff like that. And there's a lawsuit, and she testifies to this stuff under oath. And so there's like a sworn deposition where she says this stuff, and the FBI knows about that, and they still don't do anything to help this woman. And the whole time they're like, oh, this is totally normal. He's just extorting multiple immediate family members to hide $7 million in Pakistan while he's a felony hacking suspect in the House of Representatives, and he had access to all the data of 20% of congressmen, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Unreal.
It's just completely insane. And so going back to that article in Pakistan from 10 years ago, it mentioned that he was working with some dude in Pakistan. He's like a business partner over there. So I call this guy up and I say, what's up with Imran Awan? And he goes, well,
is this Rashid? Is this Rashid Minas?
Yeah, Rashid Minas.
Okay.
So, I say, what's up with this guy, Imran Awan? I'm doing an article, I'm looking into him. And he goes, well, this is the devil. I mean, this is a horrible person who double crosses everyone he ever met. How do you think he has that entourage of Pakistani agents? He's giving USB of data to Pakistani intel. And so that's the first person I really ever called up in Pakistan about this guy. Immediately alleges that he's turning over data from his job on Capitol Hill to Pakistan. And there's no other explanation that anyone's ever given why he has this extraordinary political influence in the entourage of armed guards.
So just so anyone who joined us lately, sorry, Luke, to interrupt, you've got the DNC hack going on. You've got Donald Trump, who's being harangued every day in the media. If you ever watch CNN, you know there's cry-ons running all day long about what Donald Trump is doing. Meanwhile, 44 people in Democrat Congress have hired this dude who is selling iPads, selling iPhones, and giving USB sticks and laptops to Pakistani intel officials not long after Osama bin Laden has been killed or harbored and killed in that country. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely. And so it turns out that the Democrats hired these guys with no background check despite policy. And so some of them have criminal records already. One of them has like $1 million bankruptcy, which is a big problem when you're giving someone data, because if they have money problems, they might have an incentive to steal it or sell it or whatever. And all these other red flags, specifically, a lot of them have no IT training or experience, like the 20-year-old or the McDonald's worker. So these are the people who wanted to lecture you and be up in arms about the DNC hack. Well, they've been comically negligent. The Democrats never cared about cybersecurity. They never cared about hacking. And sure enough, when this hack was caught, their instinct was just to kind of make it go away for the sake of the narrative. And so they had to make a choice, right? Which is kind of in the title of the book. There was national security. Did they choose national security or did they choose their political reputations? And you know which one they picked. It was they let the House continue to get hacked knowingly so that they could talk about Russia, because if these guys were arrested, then it hits the news and it kind of overtakes that narrative.
So this starts to bubble up. You start to get some traction. You actually do the thing from the Burbs where you go through the guy's trash and take trash home in your car, which I thought was hilarious. Honestly, look, I couldn't do your job. I'm just respect. But as things start to heat up a little bit, then we hear about how the FBI gets involved. They start doing pretend interviews, and really you think they just want to cover their tracks. Talk to us about Teresa and Jamie and the whole retirement scheme, the setup. This guy, Jamie Fleet's a real winner. Goen, same thing. I have a lot of respect for those guys. They're punks. Like, again, the Tommy Veeder thing all over again. Tell us about how that shook out with Teresa and Jamie.
So the investigator who caught the hack was actually appointed by Nancy Pelosi 10 years ago, and Paul Ryan kept her on. She's a cybersecurity expert. And so she found this hack. She's the Inspector General of the House of Representatives, pretty high-level position. And so when she finds it, They scream. Nancy Pelosi's general counsel screams at her to drop the investigation, and she won't do it because she's like, "This is a big deal. We got to investigate
This
this."
is my job.
And
Right.
so, yeah, doing my job here. And so they frame her on ethics charges and kick her out of Congress. And the guy that does this is, the guy Jamie that you mentioned. He's this kind of, I call him the puppeteer in the book. He's one of these. When people talk about the deep state, I think about people like him. He's not a famous dude. He's not a congressman. He's a staff, but he's an influential guy that knows how to pull the strings and manipulate people. And so you have a lot of manipulation in this book. You have the suspects manipulating people to make evidence disappear, etc. But then you have Democrats doing the same thing. And so the Democrats, through this elaborate campaign of manipulation and deception that's documented in the book in detail, they control, they basically manage to make this go away, even though the Republicans are in charge of the House. And so again, that's kind of, to me, what the deep state is when political people who aren't even in charge are basically in control of this shadow government. And then I think you also mentioned a couple other names, which are like Republican people who were the counterparts to this guy, who were kind of comically inept in the book. They were cowardly. They were afraid of controversy. They didn't want to push back. And the Democrats were just so much savvier, and they knew how to play the media and use that kind of stuff. And so the other thing that the Republicans did is they were very scared of this turning around on them, because it was a scandal that was so bad that it reflected poorly on the entire House of Representatives, and they were in charge after all. And so the Democrats told them that directly. They said, you guys, Paul Ryan, why didn't you stop this? This was horrible what happened in the House. You were in charge. And so they make the incentives align so that they all just kind of protect each other and hope it goes away so that the House of Representatives isn't embarrassed.
Yeah, I think Teresa was the one who went in with the 5-inch binder, right, to report to her superiors. Here's all the evidence I have, this giant stack. I'm going to throw out a couple names here, and you can help us put this together. I've got Yvette Clarke. I've got Gregory Meeks. I've got Wendy Anderson. And I forget who Nathan Bennett is, but the kind of the narrative you craft is that these are people on important committees, either Yvette or Javier Becerra is another one who's he's the Attorney General in California, which is hilarious. These are people who have been plagued by scandal. I think it's Yvette Clarke who's on a cybersecurity committee who can't even log into her email without help from Awan, which is why she has to keep him on the panel. You've got basically people who are incompetent at doing anything except for keeping their jobs, trusting this guy, and now they're defending him despite all the things he's done. And then you go to Republicans expecting this is a smoking gun. They're going to be all over it. And you'll have to put the details together for me as you do this. But I have written down here that Paul Ryan, basically uninterested. You paint him in a pretty flattering light here. And that they put out a report that all he had done is upload family photos and homework. And they said nothing to see here. And it reminded me a lot of Hillary Clinton's yoga emails, right? Oh, it's just family pics and yoga emails. Like, there's nothing. Why would I upload anything important to a server or Dropbox? That would be against the rules. I would never do that.
Yeah, no, it's completely insane. And so Yvette Clarke is a congresswoman from Brooklyn, and a tenth of her budget disappeared. And this came about because her deputy chief of staff said, "Look, this is an insane amount of money that went missing. That's a tenth of our budget."
And sorry to interrupt.
No way.
For those of us who don't live in D.C., we think money gets splashed around everywhere. But you make the point in the book that if you're a House committee member, the budget's actually pretty thin. Like, you have to, with 2 homes and offices and staff, you don't have a lot of extra money. Isn't that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, a Congress, like the government, wastes a lot of money, sure. But if you're actually talking about a House member's office, they only have 15 employees. They got a budget of like $1 million a year. So when $120,000 disappears, it's virtually impossible to miss that. And so the deputy chief of staff says, "Look, this is a kickback scheme. This is a theft scheme where the IT guy is working with the chief of staff." And so the chief of staff, resigns, or suddenly he's no longer employed, like they push him out or whatever. But the IT guy is still around. And Yvette Clarke just makes it so that the money, the records showing that this theft is just kind of wiped away. No big deal. Forget that we ever had this $120,000 of equipment. And she's on the ethics committee. And so this is really a major thing that's happened in Congress, where a member of Congress has lost a tenth of their budget, and the deputy chief of staff implicates the chief of staff. And so
on the ethics committee,
the ethics committee member makes this whole thing go away. She appears to be extraordinarily afraid of firing the IT guy, who has access to not only all of her work accounts but all of her personal stuff too. And so they look into this theft scheme further, and it's not only Yvette Clark's office where equipment has been disappearing. What they've been doing is in all these other offices, like 25 of them, they're taking these receipts and they're changing all they're cooking the books in Congress so that when you buy expensive equipment, it shows up as petty cash. So if you buy a $2,000 computer, they write it down as costing only $499. And the reason is because anything that's reported as costing less than 500 is treated as petty cash. And so the investigators quickly find these invoices which are falsified. And sure enough, every time they change the number to 499, the equipment can't be located. So it's a theft scheme, and the invoices are fraud. And so you have these pieces of paper, and you say, okay, well, here's an iPad. I know that costs $800. It's written down as $499. That's fraud. End of investigation.
Smart shopping.
And so the House doesn't do anything about this, and eventually they stall it for 2 years, and they have the FBI say, "Hey, nothing wrong happened." It did. It would only take a day of investigation to prove what happened, and investigators did prove it. There was cooking the books in Congress. These invoices prove it, and then you have the server logs documenting how these guys are logging into servers of people they don't work for, logging in using members of Congress's personal usernames.
You have staffers coming to work. You have staffers coming to work and finding people they don't know logged into their computers, right? All one's friends.
Exactly. And so there's this idea that, oh, the FBI investigated it. Don't worry, everyone. That is completely insane. The proof is all there, and they knew it. And so the FBI, or the House of Representatives, is knowingly excusing the cooking of the books of Congress and huge other breaches, which is, you heard of sanctuary cities. It's really like a sanctuary Congress where what they're running, where it's like, hey, we're going to protect each other here.
And two of the things that I remember from the story that blew my mind, one, they went to the vendor, CDWG, I think it was, who's a big government vendor, and they admitted that they were doing this. They admitted they were cooking the books to help these guys out. And I forget what they had on them to make them keep doing it, but they were worried they were going to get in trouble, naturally. And then when they tracked it down, they couldn't find the equipment. Didn't they locate it in a random elevator shaft in the building and suspected that it had just been stashed there to throw the cops off?
Yeah, so the evidence keeps disappearing. I mentioned the server that disappeared, and then you've got like all this equipment that they're like, where is it? We can't find any of it. And so the suspects are like stalling, and eventually they take them to this like old elevator shaft that's like turned into a closet, and they say, "Oh, we found it all." But it was obvious to all the investigators that they had just like repurchased similar equipment because they knew that they were caught. And so what you have is the suspects fully knew that they were being watched, and the evidence starts disappearing and everything like that. And so Paul Ryan had to answer later why they would leave a current hacking suspect on the network for 6 months, until after the election. Because it seemed like he didn't want it seemed like he didn't want Trump to win. It seemed like he wanted to help the Democrats hide this until after the election. And so he said, oh, well, we were doing a sting. And first of all, that's completely insane. You don't let people hack Congress for 6 months so you can do a sting. Second, it was proven by server logs. You didn't need to do anything else. And thirdly, they knew they were under investigation, and there's a million examples of how they knew.
We were doing a sting. We knew what was going on the whole time. So let's talk about how it wrapped. We're almost out of time here. I just literally, if you're watching this on YouTube, people, it's you just read this and go, this can't be true. Luke, and I emailed you, I hope this is a vast right-wing conspiracy. I hope Hillary Clinton's right. Like, she's always accused. The people are just out to get her because they hate women. In this case, we hate Muslims. Nobody hated him more than his family. And so when people talk about, you make a point, if anyone says we want to help the community, we're looking out for blank, fill in the blank folks, chances are they're probably serving themselves and trying to help themselves out. That's definitely what was going on here, because he hated his fellow Muslims. So
absolutely.
We get into this, and it's about crunch time. He's been arrested. We now know that the FBI, basically, this is the Narcos reference, helped his wife get out of the country, knowing she would never come back. So you can touch on that. And some of the notes I have written down are Goen, who calls it a right-wing witch hunt. You mentioned that every Democrat principle they supposedly stand for was violated here, and they were pushing to make sure they stayed violated. And then basically it amounts to all these security hawks, or professing allegiance to the country and saying that this is a national crisis on the Donald Trump end, are not cleaning their room, Jordan Peterson style on the other end. These are people who are doing really bad things, breaking the law, and in the end getting away with it. So kind of package that all up and go through how this case wrapped for you.
Well, so eventually this guy, his wife leaves the country with a briefcase full of $12,000 in cash, and The FBI follows her to the airport, and she refuses to talk to them. They search her bags and they find the cash, which is illegal because it's undeclared. And they write this report saying, "Oh yeah, she's never coming back to the U.S." But they let her leave the country anyway. And by that time, they have like a million different things they could have charged her with, including the suitcase of cash itself. And they let her leave, like you said, Narcos style.
Have you seen Narcos
couple
Mexico? For those watching, have you seen it when they catch him at the airport and they're like, it's okay, he's good, let him go. Like, drug lord, we don't need him anyway.
And so then a couple months later, Imran Awan himself tries to. So basically, they find all these hard drives in his house, and this guy turns them in. And basically, what happens is, to your point about this guy, Chris Gowan, this is a Hillary Clinton aide, a top aide to Hillary Clinton for many years, that Imran Awan hires as his lawyer. And members of Congress actually provide him with this lawyer. And so this is a current hacking suspect that's being defended by, Hillary aide. And so the lawyer starts just basically lying, making these insane media appearances designed to rally up liberals to, unknowingly use their partisan allegiance to protect this guy who's not in any sense liberal. He's just a bad dude. And so eventually the guy himself, Imran Awan, flees the country with $9,000 in cash in a suitcase, and he's arrested at the airport. And so at that point, I think, okay, finally, they're going to charge him with everything. It turns out that they just charged him with the cover-up, just trying to get that money overseas before, like all this money he was trying to funnel over to Pakistan without charging. So they charge him with the cover-up, but not the crime. And it winds up kind of being like a relatively minor financial crime. And so eventually they stall for over a year, inexplicably not bringing any of these charges that are fully documented. And it turns out that whole time behind the scenes, they are negotiating, if you want to call it that, with this Hillary Clinton lawyer. Basically, everyone is given immunity on all sides, just like in the Hillary Clinton server case. And a lot of evidence starts disappearing, including the hard drives that were turned over, which is this guy. He moves into a house. So this guy flees the country, right? And he moves out of his house in a hurry. This guy moves in to rent it. And he gets this call. Right? Yeah. And so this Clinton lawyer keeps calling him. You got to give back that stuff. I'm going to sue you. You're going to be thrown in jail. Give me back that stuff. And so the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, but he just sees that some lawyer is like really, really pissed. So he's like, what is it? What could be such a big deal? And so he looks in his house and he finds all these hard drives, and he realizes like something's not right. The lawyer's freaking out. So he calls the cops, and it turns out the FBI comes and takes the hard drives. Well, later on, they say, oh, that guy only gave us a car radio, one old car radio. And this guy is not an idiot. He was actually a Marine specialist in all that IT stuff in the Marines. And he turned over Blackberries and hard drives and things like that. And so this is just one of numerous examples where the evidence literally just disappears in the hands of the police. And again, it just made me think, are we still in America anymore? This is Banana Republic
and
stuff.
I gave away the punchline earlier. They accused this guy later of being a right-wing nut job, right? And he actually turned out to be a Facebook Bernie bro. Am I mistaken that story?
Well, so there's another guy. So then, basically the media doesn't cover this because there's no arrests and a lot of, there's no major charges.
Sure.
And so a lot of the media nowadays, they don't want to look at evidence themselves. They want to piggyback on what did the FBI say or not say. And so the Democrats know that. That's why they want to rig the FBI case so they can control the narrative. And then they try to basically paint it as, right-wing conspiracy fake news. And so they find some random guy on YouTube who's like making videos about it. And they say, oh, he's so disreputable. This is all made up. And so, that's actually some crazy Bernie bro guy who's making these videos. But the point is sort of an orchestrated campaign to stigmatize something that is very much documented. And just the way that they expertly manipulate the FBI and the media to control the narrative.
So now I want to go back to something I asked about. We didn't really cover too much. When the FBI jump in, now all of a sudden they're saying we're interviewing everyone. We've investigated this fully. You make a comment that they said they investigated, I think, 40-some people in 2 years, which you did in the first month of investigating this. Because just the primary players here would account for that many interviews. And then you tell the story about Teresa, the lead investigator who originally discovered this, now is basically being interrogated as a suspect. And you make the claim or the assertion that it's so that they have someone to pin this on. So you mentioned Teresa, you mentioned this Republican guy, Kiko, and you say now they're scrambling to figure out how they can cover it up. Now all these guys that know about this or knew about it are in trouble because they don't want Awan to go down because they'll take everyone else down with them. Kind of give us some clarity on how that happened and this whole retirement thing where Fleet told Teresa to not tell anyone she was leaving so they could throw a retirement party. I thought that was great.
Yeah, so you've got these two guys, Sean and Jamie, and Sean is the Republican guy in charge of all this behind the scenes stuff in the House, and Jamie is the Democrat. And so Sean is supposed to be in charge. The Republicans control the House, but Jamie is just so much more aggressive. He just lies, and this guy Sean is just so naive. He just keeps falling for it like a bumbling fool. And Jamie is just manipulating and manipulating. And one of the things that they do is they get the investigator. So this is the investigator who found the hack. She winds up giving a speech on ethics because she's such an expert in all this stuff over in a foreign country. And so Jamie goes to her like, that's collusion. You're colluding with a foreign government. And they just, this is a woman who has documented ethical misconduct in the House of Representatives, and they don't charge the suspects, but they do threaten this woman with this insane thing so just the hypocrisy is pretty insane to talk about Russia all the time and then talk about the investigators colluding with the foreign government. And so they drive her out of office. And that's just one of the many times that people are in kind of threatened and retaliated against.
Yeah, didn't he threaten her with a Logan Act violation, like a potential treason accusation for setting up a contract with a foreign country for giving a speech? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, it's totally insane.
So then it's really interesting now. You read this, and then you read who was in charge of the counterintelligence unit in the FBI, and his name is Peter Strzok, who at that time might not have rang any bells, but now you go, okay, this all makes sense. What ended up happening to Awan? Did he end up going to jail for life as he should have?
So they only charged him with the minor stuff around fleeing, and then they gave him a plea deal on that, very favorable plea deal with full immunity. And they put out a statement saying, don't believe the media, the fake news. We investigated this thoroughly, and he has never done anything wrong, which the FBI doesn't do that in any ordinary circumstance. They don't put out statements proactively saying that you didn't do things you were never even charged with. This guy was clearly being protected. It was members of Congress really protecting themselves, but they had to make this go away. And so they put out this extraordinary statement. Imran Awan comes in with his Clinton lawyer and says, the $7 million I have over in Pakistan, well, I'm a charity magnate. And, the money that I stole and wired over to Pakistan, which was a felony, I just had to create a charity over there for a battered women's shelter. You see, I care for battered women so badly that I just felt the need to defraud a bank and send hundreds of thousands of dollars over to create that. And so the judge is just like, oh, wow, thanks. You're such a nice guy. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely insane. No rational person would have thought any of this made sense. Why would you commit a felony to create a charity over there? At the same time that they're pretending he's poor and blah, blah, blah. It's just completely demented and delusional. But a lot of reporters went along with it because basically it fell into that Trump derangement syndrome thing. So none of this really had anything to do with Donald Trump. I mean, this occurred before he was president, but because it involved Democrats and because one of the guys happened to be Muslim, it was astonishing for me to see how people use identity politics as a wedge to protect themselves. And these are just horrible, horrible dudes who tricked the average liberal American into running cover for a horrible guy who really violated every one of their ethics.
Yeah, and there's a whole chapter in here on Jeff Sessions being Mr. Magoo, and I think what makes me scratch my head is you got Paul Ryan, who I do believe your theory, who had a lot to gain by letting the scandal come out after Hillary Clinton won so that he could set himself up for 2020, which kind of irritates me, but not unlike everything else in the book. You wrote in Obstruction of Justice, Insider Threats, when it came to the cybersecurity anomalies, Goen blamed members pointing to Congress' inefficient and decentralized IT system, or what Bacon, another guy, called a shocking lack of IT and hardware security on Capitol Hill. So basically framing it as a Republican issue because they were the majority party. And you ask, would Intelligence Committee member Joaquin Castro really be willing to take the stand in a courtroom and admit he'd never bothered to run a background check on his IT staffer? Would Wasserman Schultz say under oath she imagined her computers were being safely administered when Imran was in Pakistan for several months on end? Would Andre Carson dare testify about his response to the secret email account linked to his intelligence staffer? Did Representative Ted Deutsch realize that a judge would not permit his no-comment routine when asked if he'd ever seen his purported IT aide who worked at McDonald's? This goes on for pages. These people had no interest in doing their jobs. They had no interest in seeing evil when it was right in front of them. And they were letting one family run, 20% of the entire Democrat IT office from a country that's in some ways considered hostile. I just want to tell everyone who's listening, Luke Rosiak's book is awesome. It's early in the year, but I'm confident this will be one of the best books that I read this year. Did the whole thing in a day, and all I can tell you is we haven't even scratched the surface. In the end of chapter, he mentions that this book isn't even the half of it. So kind of wish we were buddies, Luke, and I could hear the rest sometime. But I just want to thank you for your work. I want to encourage everyone to go out and read the book and learn what's in there. And Luke, I'm going to give you the last word. Tell us what else we need to know about this.
Well, this is a book that if you're wondering how corrupt is the FBI, how common is it that they rig investigations the way that they did with Hillary Clinton's email server and the Donald Trump Russia thing, this is a book that kind of shows you how the deep state works. And it's fun to read because it doesn't lecture you, it doesn't give you opinions. It just brings you into this insane case that just kind of shows you everything you need to know. And I think that you'll probably never think about the kind of these elite people in Washington protecting each other and the way that they use the FBI and the DOJ to rig cases. Never going to think about that stuff in the same way again after you read this.
Is it, have you gotten a call from anyone to make a documentary? Because I'm of the opinion that instead of making Marvel movies about magic rocks in space, they could just do true to life Washington documentaries. They could say, let us take you inside of Washington for this 2-year period and tell you what's really going on. And you got a $100 million blockbuster on your hands. You have aspirations to do that?
I think it should be a Hollywood film. I mean, that's what's crazy about this is it's true story, but it seems like fiction. It's just that insane, and that's kind of the whole idea here is, my God, what's being withheld from us? What's true anymore? We're being manipulated. So I think it's a fun drama. I tried to write this book like a drama because I think it's real life, but it does. It seems like a movie. It seems like a Hollywood movie.
Well, I'm curious to see where you go from here because you knocked it out of the park with this book. So I want to thank you. Those of you watching at home, please like and share. Make sure we get this story out. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of Luke here in the near future because what you're going to read is going to bend your mind and really, really upset you. The inmates are running the asylum. Luke, thank you so much. Everyone, you can follow Luke on Twitter. You can buy the book on Amazon and wherever excellent books are sold. And I wish you luck, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.